Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather with us on the 16th of April. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information online at weather.gov/Alaska. You can always find more information from the Alaska Weather Information Line as well, 1-800-472-0391. And if you can't find what you're looking for on our website, on social media, twitter.com with NWS Fairbanks and NWS Juneau, NWS Anchorage, or NWS Alaska, or on Facebook with the similar addresses, let me know. David.Snider@noaa.gov is an easy way to find me. I'm happy to answer any of your questions as often as I can, and just email away. Let me know how I can help. It's my pleasure to serve you any way I can. Let's take a look at the hazardous weather across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range to the upper Koyukuk and all the way down to the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys and into the central interior. From Tanana up toward Bettles, a winter weather advisory is in effect until tomorrow afternoon, Wednesday or so, about 6 o'clock. We're expecting some accumulating snow. Now, most places where most of you live are looking at about 1 to 3 inches of snow, but as you get up closer to some of the higher terrain here north of Ambler, north of Bettles, and generally along the hills into Arctic Village, you could see as much as 7 inches of snow. A few places in some of the lower terrain could see as much as 3. But what you need to know is that there will be additional snow on the ground. It is going to be colder, and most of the snow should start to taper off by tomorrow afternoon before conditions begin to improve. But you may have some clearing to do, as snow may be back in the way there, and temperatures will be cooling off as we go forward. You'll see those maps here in just a minute. In the meantime, we are still talking about breakup from areas upstream from Fairbanks all the way up to Tanana, the Chena, and certainly in the Susitna Valley and westward across the range. You can tell that conditions have been warming up. Now, with the cold air moving in, breakup's probably going to slow down just a little bit. And the good news is we are going to have another update we expect from the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center as we get into Thursday afternoon, just as we did that time last week with Crane Johnson. So his expert opinion will be shared with you. Make sure you watch on Thursday for the very latest information from Crane and the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center as he talks about some of the changes we've seen in the last week or so, and especially with the new colder air dropping into the area. So right now, no major flooding concerns. That's great. No flood watches, no flood warnings. So far, we're certainly easing into generally easy breakup pattern so far, but the main rivers there, the Yukon and a good chunk of the Kuskokwim, though not all of it, you're certainly seeing some open areas there. Those continue to be generally frozen up, but a word of caution, as we've seen time and time again this season, make sure you check the ice and know the conditions before you go out on it, because a lot of the river ice in Alaska is no longer safe for travel. So make sure you check in with local officials, check in with the elders, check in with the folks up in the north there before you travel out on the weather, because the ice again has been rotting in place thanks to some of the warm weather we've seen. Some of the news that we got last week when we talked to Crane was that breakup will be early across a large part of the state. So I expect that he will update this map for you. But the latest and greatest was that most places there will see an early breakup, about 10 to 14 days early, in fact. Again, 2 to 3 weeks early for those in the southern parts of Alaska, and maybe 1 to 2 weeks early for areas in the north. So places like Eagle could be talking about breakup here in the next week or so. Areas a little bit further south and west, maybe closer toward the beginning of May. So a lot of changes and a lot of things that may be a little bit more on the unusual side as we go. The good news is no significant fire danger today. There are a couple of wildfires going out there, one of those grass fire, I believe, up in the valley, but nothing really significant going right now, and with conditions becoming cooler and wetter in the west and wrapping into south central with new rain moving into southeast. As southeast has started your fire weather season at this point, conditions are not really conducive to widespread fire, so very good news there. A little blink on the satellite picture there. You'll see that a couple times as we go through, but the big picture is that low pressure is working in out of the Bering Sea, drawing in moisture across the interior and pushing that into the mountains. Because of that, we are seeing that snow fall across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range and into the upper Koyukuk Valley. Across south central, that colder air is working its way across the mountains very, very slowly, trying to find its way through the nooks and crannies. We do expect to see snow falling across some parts of the mountains in the Chugach, around the Kenai, all the way up into around Prince William Sound and of course around the Anchorage area. Most of that will be higher terrain snow. We'll probably see a better chance of rainfall here as we get into tonight, but you might see a little bit of snow on the hillside. In southeast, it is going to be rainfall for you. There will be some higher terrain snow that you'll see in the region, but primarily 1 to 2.5 inches of very much needed rain across central and southern parts of southeast especially. And out across the west, you'll notice a patch of clouds working in. That's all working its way through high pressure that's setting up across the Bering Sea at this point, so that will keep things generally stable. Here's a look at the surface chart. Low pressure sitting across Northway at 995 millibars with a 987 millibar low here across the eastern Gulf. This is working its way east now. The bulk of the cold air is all the way through the west coast, and high pressure is grabbing onto that from the Arctic and channeling that through the Bering Strait. We are seeing some areas of light snow right now across the YK. Most of what we're seeing that will probably start to amount to something is what we're seeing now across parts of the Kobuk, Noatak areas and into places closer to Ambler and Bettles. Now south of that should start to fill in as we get in through the rest of the afternoon and evening. And once again, winter weather advisories have been posted for the region. Some light snow across the North Slope today and also just inland from Wainwright across the areas just north of some of the Brooks Range summits. As we get into tonight, low pressure sitting just around Sitka there, 1,002 millibars. Watch for areas of light showers across the north and eastern Gulf, some areas of light snow across the higher terrain. And again, most of that should stay at mountaintop level for most areas. That cold front is going to try and work its way through the valleys very slowly. It's going to be a very discombobulated process where we don't really see one big surge of cold air blasting through. Pretty hard to do when you have a mountain, a wall of rock off to your west and to your north. And that's what the Alaska Range is doing for south central, and one reason why it's so temperate most of the time. Across the west coast, northerlies will continue, and it looks like snow showers will fill in across the region thanks to high pressure lingering across the eastern parts of Asia. Blowing snow will still be an issue as we go through the Chukchi Sea. Areas of fog expected too. A front will linger across the Brooks Range, and again, this forcing with the air moving into the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range combined with low pressure lingering in that same area will help to keep that snow factor going as we get into tonight and tomorrow. That's going to shift off to the east for Wednesday. The wraparound cold and moisture will still be there, and we do expect snow to continue throughout the morning hours across the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range into the upper Kobuk and Noatak valleys and certainly the Koyukuk Valley. A little bit further down in elevation, you're going to start to run into a better chance of rainfall. So it'll be right on the brink there for areas across the upper Yukon and probably into the Tanana Valley. But for the Alaska Range, for areas around the Talkeetnas and into the Chugach, you're likely going to see some new snow. Just below that, where most of us are driving, trying to get up and down the Kenai through the Anchorage region or through the valleys, until you get to about Talkeetna, from Anchorage, chances are most of that is going to be at least rain, maybe mixed with snow, but generally speaking, it looks like liquid precipitation. We are expecting gales to come up across parts of southeast. A 983 millibar low across the central and eastern Gulf is really going to drive the wind through the region. So watch for gales, and again, watch for some rainfall across a widespread part of southeastern Alaska as we go through your Wednesday. As we get into Thursday, you'll notice the rain and snow across the southern Bering has now become all snow showers there. Rain showers expected across parts of the Alaska Peninsula, wrapping into this low pressure system, and the feed of moisture in the southeast is still there. So again, it does look like you could see a solid inch to 2.5 inches in many parts of central and southern parts of southeast. Low pressure sitting across the Copper River Valley will continue to work this frontal boundary out of Alaska slowly and surely. Across the Yukon, periods of light snow should continue there. The main forcing of snow will be moving out of Alaska at this point, with a front still working through the central and eastern interior. We do expect to see some rain and snow showers across the northern interior as we get into Thursday. And with cold still working its way into the Brooks Range, the north slope will likely see some lower decks and visibility and probably some snow showers there, as well as blowing snow. And we have that symbol here across the Chukchi just to support that all the way down through the Bering Strait. Now, one good thing, what about sea ice? We are talking about cold temperatures. We're talking about north winds, so we've got a lot of things in place to grow some new sea ice. It will not be the midwinter type of ice that will get terribly thick and stick around for a while, but it will be some new ice. There's also a decent opportunity that some of the ice that's been in the Chukchi Sea, that's a little bit more of the older, maybe even multi-year ice, it could be moving around a little bit more. So watch for some of that older ice to be on the move in some places that it hasn't been recently, and certainly watch for some of the open areas to fill in. But keep in mind again that this is going to be very young ice that's filling in, and not the midwinter thick ice that would keep you safe if you ride on it. So make sure you check conditions both on the river and on the sea ice before you go out, since it's been such an odd season for many of us. Let's take a look at temperatures across the region for Wednesday morning. You're talking about mid to upper 30s, almost 40 degrees in fact for Sitka tomorrow morning. Prince William Sound temperatures just above freezing. Cook Inlet temperatures also on the mild side, 37 around Kodiak. Fairbanks looking at temps in the mid to upper 20s, and single-digit temps for the North Slope. Shishmaref, you're looking at about 14 overnight, 11 in Nome, Southwest in the teens and 20s, St. Paul 28, Dutch Harbor and Alaska 33. Afternoon temperatures in Southeast should remain in the mid to upper 40s, so a little bit cooler than today as clouds and wet weather move in. Temps not too far from that in the mid to upper 40s for South Central, Homer, Seward, all the way toward Cordova, Prince William Sound, Valdez, and Whittier, all looking at temps at or above the 40-degree mark, but probably just barely towing the 50-degree line in Cordova tomorrow. About 50 for Northway and Eagle, 37 for Fort Yukon, 29 in Arctic Village, teens for the North Slope, Kotzebue looking at 27, 26 in Nome, and Unalakleet, upper 20s as you get into the Kuskokwim Delta, 29 in Bethel, 35 around St. Paul and St. George. For Thursday morning, expect lows in the 30s and 40s in southeast, close to freezing in south central, teens and 20s as you get along the Yukon and Kuskokwim valleys. Into the Koyukuk, about 15 for Galena, and anywhere from 5 below to about 5 above across the North Slope. As you get into Thursday afternoon, look for temperatures in the mid to upper 40s in southeast. Copper River Valley also fairly mild. Cordova still near 50 degrees, 44 in Kodiak. Bethel looking at about 32, 28 for Makoryuk. St. Paul 33 degrees, and 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint closer to 40, Adak and Atka just shy of 40, and Utqiagvik, you're looking at a high on Thursday afternoon closer to 8, with Kaktovik coming in at a milder 16, and about 25 for those in Nome.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to aviation weather now. MVFR conditions are expected to be fairly widespread up and down the Yukon Valley into the Kuskokwim and all over the Bering Strait and the Bering Sea, but generally over the central and eastern Aleutians with some patchy VFR areas across southwestern Bristol Bay, Lake Iliamna, Kodiak Island, IFR across the central and southern higher terrain across southeast, but MVFR fairly widespread across the Inside Passage and the outer coast. IFR will also be widespread across the Beaufort Seacoast, down through Adigan and Anaktuvik Pass and into the upper end of the Yukon Valley, almost into the Tanana Valley. You'll see improvements throughout the day on Wednesday. MVFR stays fairly widespread, but the VFR starts to move back in across some parts of southwest, not quite to Bethel though. King Salmon and Dillingham should sneak out on the OK side. Watch for patchy areas of IFR around Valdez, otherwise MVFR widespread across the north and eastern Gulf and across the Yukon Valley. Up north, IFR conditions there across the central and eastern parts of the North Slope into the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast. That expands again by Thursday morning, leaving some patchy areas of VFR across the middle Yukon down to southwest. Otherwise, MVFR pretty much in the same old spot. Watch for IFR across the Skagway and the Haines region and certainly up north through some of the passes. Otherwise, MVFR remains pretty consistent there. The Copper River Valley sees some breaks by the afternoon. That begins to fill back in. MVFR conditions up into Tanita Pass by Thursday. IFR develops across the central and western Brooks Range summits there, with the areas around the Beaufort Seacoast still lingering under IFR. Otherwise, no big changes for southwest, the interior, or southeast as we get into the end of the week. Wednesday, we're expecting IFR for Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass throughout the entire day there. For Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we should see some improvements heading toward VFR as the day goes on. Rainy paths expected to be marginal throughout most of the day. Windy paths, IFR conditions there. Isabel Pass also looking at IFR throughout the beginning of the day, but probably looking at least some marginal improvements throughout the rest of the afternoon. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see visual flight rule throughout the day. Tenita Pass, MVFR as the day goes on. And Portage Pass looking at marginal levels through most of the day, and really no substantial change as you move eastward toward Chilcoot and White Pass. Freezing levels show that warm air is sitting just south and west of Haida Gwaii and kind of lingering very close to southeast. The 2,000-foot freezing line pushing up into Stevens Passage and the Cross Sound region, otherwise the surface freezing line right over the Kenai Peninsula, the Alaska Peninsula, and just north of St. Paul and St. George, but south of St. Matthew at this time. Another small area of slightly warmer air there across the upper end of the Yukon Valley and along the Alcan border. Icing potential, though, certainly higher up there, anywhere from about 2,000 to 5,000 feet, maybe even 6,000 feet if you go all the way out toward the Alcan. And south and west, you can see very different levels closer to land, above 2,000 feet here, but as you get further out toward the Pribilovs and the eastern chain, those levels climb to as much as 6,000 feet, and above 5,000 to about 7,000 feet for the north and eastern Gulf. They're generally looking at isolated moderate conditions. The jet stream has our large area of low pressure digging into the Gulf now, and that's creating more of a south and southeasterly flow coming into southeastern Alaska. You can see a little bit of a ridge right here. Generally southerly winds coming into the interior, northerlies coming over the Bering Strait and into the Bering itself, 60 to about 95 knots. The main corridor of storm track still lies well to the south of Alaska. At 9,000 feet, here's our developing trough then. That'll be pretty much a resident as we head into the weekend. North and easterlies coming through the Bering Strait, 20 to about 30 knots. Northwesterlies crossing over the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and the chain, all on the eastern side of high pressure. You can see the ridge just holding on here from the Kamchatka and into the northern Pacific waters. Southerlies will be the rule across southeastern Alaska with wind speeds over land around 30 knots, but just offshore you can see a speed max developing here anywhere from 60 to 75 knots, so more active weather is certainly moving in that general direction. A ridge of high pressure across the Yukon and into British Columbia. Easterlies across the North Slope, 15 to 20 knots at 3,000 feet. Northerlies coming down across the Bering Strait, 20 to about 25. Northwesterly winds, as we saw at 9,000 feet, they're a little bit slower here, 15 to 20 knots crossing the peninsula and the chain. Our ridge of high pressure feeding in winds well off to the west, coming in from the south and east over the western chain. And then stronger area of low pressure here across the Gulf at this level, anywhere from 50 to 70 knots. Some of those faster winds working their way into the southern end of the panhandle at this point. Otherwise, winds will be fairly light across the interior. So where are we watching for turbulence tomorrow? Generally below 4,000 feet. Watch for some chop throughout most of the panhandle, but a better chance for considerable moderate here around Ketchikan, Craig, Klawock, and into places like Hyder. Most of the interior should be generally quiet. We'll watch for some chop around maybe Kodiak and then into the southern end, almost to Homer, probably over the Barren Islands, and then for the North Slope, especially over the Kotzebue Sound region, Kobuk and Noatak valleys included below 4,000 feet. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and we have a special guest in the studio today. We welcome Amanda Terborg of the Aviation Weather Center. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Amanda's flown in all the way from Kansas City, and for those of you that don't know, the Aviation Weather Center serves the lower 48 for aviators, just as the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit here in Anchorage serves all of Alaska. So I kind of wonder, what's the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City doing to help out Alaska, Amanda?
Yeah, you know, we do a lot of collaboration work with our sister station up here. Lately, we've been doing a lot of work, especially in the satellite meteorology.
Okay.
In particular, we have been looking at ways to better identify icing conditions in clouds, which is a big deal up here because, as I'm coming to find out, even though I'm not from here, you guys have a lot of pilots here.
You have a lot of pilots. In fact, when you say you can't get there from here, that's how you get there.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so with icing potential then, what's Kansas City working on?
Well, we are working on something that will help us, again, identify the icing in the clouds. You don't want ice on your aircraft.
No.
Not only does it add a whole bunch of extra weight to your airframe when it attaches to the wings and the nose cone, but it can also mess with your aerodynamics.
Right.
And in the most serious conditions, that can mess with it enough that you can actually crash.
It changes the shape of the wing, and that makes it sometimes impossible to fly, right?
It does, yeah. So we want to figure out a way to better forecast for that.
Makes sense.
Now this particular image is over Alaska. The colors here are a little goofy. It doesn't look like your run-of-the-mill satellite image.
Okay.
But the red is where you have liquid clouds and the blue is ice. But again, it really doesn't tell you a lot where you have icing conditions in that cloud. because in those clouds there's little droplets, and they're cold, and they're actually below freezing, but they're still liquid, and that makes them sticky.
Okay.
So when an aircraft flies through there, those droplets are sticking to the aircraft, and it can happen amazingly fast.
Right.
And so that's what we're trying to find. And there is a product called the Aircraft Flight Icing Threat that does this. And it's basically looking at the temperature of the cloud, and it's also looking at the size of the droplets to identify a probability and intensity of those icing conditions.
Okay.
And if you flip to the next image, this is a case from Juneau, Alaska, where this probably wouldn't have been the best day to fly around Juneau.
Okay.
Now there was an area of moisture that pushed south from the southwest up along the coast that pushed in a stratus layer, and in the stratus layer there was a lot of those super cooled liquid drops, or a lot of stickiness.
Okay.
And so the flight icing threat was able to, in the pinks and the reds there, was able to identify where that icing was. Now this is really cool. You know, it's really cool to be able to identify that. There is, you know, of course, caveats to every product. Much as we wish it would happen, sun doesn't shine all the time, unless, I guess, if you live in northern Alaska during the summertime.
Right, right.
But we need that sun to be able to bounce off those clouds and to be able to see where those super cool drops are.
Okay, so it's a daytime only tool.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right now, of course, you know, we're in the era of advanced satellite technology, and there is a satellite that can actually use moonlight to see clouds.
Yes.
And so sometime in the future, we hope to be able to do that.
Okay.
Another thing that is a bit of a challenge is multiple layers of clouds. You know, you can only see so far through a thick cloud.
Okay.
And if it's thick enough, sometimes you can't see a layer of icing that's below there.
Right, right.
But even besides those caveats, this product has a lot of potential to help out Alaskan aviators here.
Well, it sounds like a really big deal, and something that forecasters at the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit could use probably on a daily basis, and especially in the middle of a really big storm.
Yeah, I would think so.
Do you have a really good success story in the lower 48 using this tool?
You know, it's a fairly new product, and so we're still evaluating it. But yeah, we have had a lot of cases where we have seen that it does tend to capture those icing conditions.
Okay, very good. Well, Amanda, thanks so much for sharing some of the very interesting satellite imagery and the tools that you're using there at the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City with us here in Alaska. People can probably find some of this information online, right? Yeah,
here is a website here. It's a page from NASA Langley, and they have this imagery as well as a bunch of other satellite imagery that you can take a look at.
Okay, great. And I'm sure our friends at the Alaska Aviation Weather Center and the unit will be using that in the coming months there with your training and your help there to learn more about that tool to help Alaska aviators any day of the year. That's wonderful stuff. So thanks again for joining us, Amanda, and we welcome you to view any of our Alaska weather facts on YouTube anytime at the address below, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with your sea ice. Now, you'll notice over the next few days that there will be some areas that fill in with at least some marginal ice where we've had no ice on the map for a while because the colder air is working through. That new ice, though, will not be as solid as some of the midwinter ice, so make sure you're using extra caution if you're going out on the ice. Check conditions before you go, before you drive out on it for sure. And make sure you talk to other people in your community before you go, just to keep yourself and others safe in the region. For the very latest ice conditions, head to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice, and we appreciate your reports from your community as well. Let's take a look at southeast. Remember, we said gales are coming up across the outer coast as we go into your Wednesday, thanks to the incoming wave of wet and windy weather. 10 to 35 knots on the inside. The strongest winds will start in the south and work their way northward as we go. 35 to 45 knots on the outside as well. A gust of 40 there outside of Yakutat, with seas coming up from 11 to 17 feet on the outside. You'll notice that onshore push as we get into Thursday. 30 to 40 knots sustained, with seas to 20 to 24 feet on the inside. 25 to 30 knots there. Gust of 40 knots, in fact, for the Lynn Canal and Stevens Passage, with seas from 5 to 8 feet as we get into Thursday. Across South Central, the winds won't be quite that strong. 15 knots with more of an easterly flow inside of Prince William Sound, 2-foot seas there. Southerlies in the northern part of Cook Inlet, a west and southwesterly flow in the southern part. As you get south of Kenai, you'll notice seas coming up from 3 to 7 feet. Northwesterlies Outside of the Barren Islands, they're 10 to 20 knots. As we get into Thursday, a stronger westerly draw moving across the northern Gulf, all wrapping into low pressure that's closer to southeast at this point. A west to northwesterly flow moving out of Prince William Sound. Light westerlies in the north with 3-foot seas and 7 to 8-foot seas over the Barrens, 3-foot seas inside of Prince William Sound. For Bristol Bay, look for a northwest flow, 15 knots and 4-foot seas there, 5-foot seas down the coast. A north and westerly wind from Kodiak Island all the way down towards Sand Point, 4-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait, 6-foot seas on the eastern side. As you get into Thursday, a west and northwesterly wind across the southern Bering Sea coast, 4-foot seas there, 5-foot seas in Shelikof Strait, and you're looking at about 4 to maybe as high as 6-foot seas from AKwx all the way down towards Sand Point, again with that 20 to 25 knot wind. Across the Aleutians, 10 to 15 knots in most areas, a general light wind there with that north and westerly flow. Anywhere from 5 to 7-foot seas, 5 to 6-foot seas across the Pacific coast, up to 20 knots south of Unalaska and Nikolsky. And not a big change there for Thursday, but generally north and northeasterly winds setting up as high pressure sitting further northward toward the Kamchatka Peninsula, and north and easterly winds will continue to blow. And again, generally light conditions, though considerably cooler than it has been for a while. Look for the northerly wind to continue over Norton Sound, south of St. Lawrence Island through Macoriac as well. A 15 to 20 knot wind for most areas, maybe as strong as 30 as you move towards St. Lawrence Island. Look for seas there to 5 feet, 4-foot seas for St. Paul and St. George on a westerly wind coming over the Pribilof Islands. A little bit more of a northwesterly flow as we get into Thursday. 7-foot seas expected there. North winds continue, and once again, this should help to breed a little bit more new ice, but with the wind staying up there, that will limit how much that can grow, and also it will be that younger ice as always. Anywhere from 3 to 7-foot seas south of St. Lawrence Island to Nunivak Island, 8-foot seas around St. Matthew, and 5-foot seas on a 20-knot wind from the north and west in the Kuskokwim Delta region. As we look at the north slope, north and easterly winds are expected across the Beaufort. This is going to blow and drift some snow around, so be mindful of poor visibility. North and easterlies across the Chukchi coast, 25 to 30 knots expected as we go through Wednesday. And on into Thursday, not a big change, 20 to 25 for the Beaufort Sea coast out toward Utqiagvik, and north and easterlies coming down through the Chukchi coast as we go through your Thursday afternoon. Northerlies through the Bering Strait, 30 knots with a 7-foot sea there on Thursday. Recapping tonight's weather, winter weather advisories are posted all the way from the Kobuk and Noatak valleys through the southeastern slopes of the Brooks Range and south into the central interior, which does include Tanana out toward Galena and northward. Closer to the mountains, you're going to see about 7 inches of snow at most. Below that, perhaps as much as 3. In most areas, especially as you move further and further south, we'll probably talk about 1 to 3 inches of snow. A winter weather advisory means visibility is going to come down while it's snowing, maybe as much as a half mile or so, and you might have a little bit of a breeze. As that happens, it might make travel a little bit more difficult, so be prepared for that. Things should start to improve as we get into Wednesday afternoon and evening, and you'll notice low pressures moving away from the Alcan. In the meantime, stronger winds and some periods of moderate, maybe occasionally heavy rain will move into central and southern parts of southeast. We expect to see 1 to maybe 2.5 inches of much needed rain across some parts of the southern panhandle. So good news there. There could be a little bit of snow across some of the higher terrain around Anchorage and into the Matanuska and Susitna valleys there. Don't expect a whole lot on the road system, probably just a little bit of rain as we go from tonight into early tomorrow. Snow showers and cold will be the rule, though, as we move into the rest of the week. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal, pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.